Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Yes, one of those videos, a second North London derby defeat of the season. Tottenham 14 points behind Arsenal, who are top of the table by, 8 points at the moment? Really looking like they actually might go and do it and win the Premier League. And Tottenham, I'm sorry to say it, but it feels like they're slipping backwards from where they were last season. And obviously, fans all divided as to where the blame lies, which is completely understandable because, you know, I think there's a lot of directions the finger can be pointed in. You know, is it Daniel Levy and the board for having really no discernible joined-up plan whatsoever? It feels like for Spurs' progression on the pitch, certainly. More than 20 years in charge, a single League Cup, the one constant, you know, as we keep saying. And also, I think probably the most difficult to understand is more recently is obviously the appointment of a manager who requires a certain level of investment, and they have invested, because we're going to talk about that, but they're just, when I'm even struggling for words to understand it, because I've said this a million times in these videos, and I said it before he was appointed. I said it the first time I spoke to him. When you appoint Antonio Conte, when you're attracted by all the bright lights of the silverware, the glistening silverware that absolutely has, you know, gone across his career, and his CV is stacked full of it, you have to thoroughly research and understand exactly what it takes for him to, I guess, to operate, and the environment he used to working within. And if you're not going to provide that same environment, then he's unlikely to be able to replicate what he's done elsewhere. So that's quite clearly one direction that the finger could be pointed in. The other, of course, is Antonio Conte himself. You know, brilliant job last season. Absolutely no bones about it. Took a team in real trouble and absolutely transformed them. Took them up the table. Ended up finishing 4th, Champions League, which, let's be honest, at one point in the season, we had absolutely kind of no expectation that was probably going to end up being the way the campaign was going to finish. However, since then, it's not really being untruthful, I don't feel, to say that the team's difficult to watch. It's got a very rigid system that I think this season has become a little bit predictable for opponents. I feel that there's that. And obviously, the way the matches play out, which we're going to talk about, has just become boringly repetitive. It's the same thing week in, week out right now. And as I said, feels like the team has gone backwards with him at the helm. Since May, let's say, since that game against Norwich. And that's despite having, I think I worked out, it's about 130 million put into it, albeit it was across 7 transfers, and albeit, you know, 15 million of that is Udogie, who will come next summer. So technically, if you want to say 115 million across 6, you know, so it's had improvements, yet it feels like Spurs are further away from the top 4 than at large points last season as well. So that feels like a backward step in that regard as well. You know, again, if you want to put into there, that could also fall into the Levy and the board section, in that 115 million, although, you know, it's a fair whack of money, spread across 6 players, is different to the normal kind of investment that Antonio Conte would get at other clubs. It is. You know, obviously, you know, Richarlison was 60 million, but then you're looking at others that are spread out with free transfers and players, you know, in the far smaller brackets. But that's the second place you can look. The third would be the players themselves. You know, obviously, Hugo Lloris stands out yesterday, and unfortunately in recent games, the captain of your football club is making more and more regular mistakes, which obviously it's sad to see, because obviously he's given so much to Tottenham. And we're going to talk about Hugo in a little bit of depth later on. But obviously he's making mistakes regularly now, and they're turning games. We saw it against Villa, we saw it against Arsenal, and that's just in the 2 home games this year. And Son Heung-min, obviously Sonny, Golden Boot winner last year, one of Spurs' most important players that they could rely on for season after season. He's just having a nightmare of a season. He's struggling to make an impact against defences and teams and opposition teams that he would run riot against in previous seasons. And that's contributing as well, because, as I say, Spurs relied on Sonny's goals and assists, and they're not getting them right now. And it's not just those 2 players either. The defence looks brittle at times. Attackers look brittle in the kind of respect that they've spent a long time in the treatment room this season as well. That's another thing on Antonio Conte's side, is that, he hasn't had access to Kulusevski for the full season. Richarlison came in for 60 million, but has missed chunks of the season. Bentancur obviously now as well. So, yeah, there is that aspect to it as well. But it's a difficult club to analyse right now, because there's so many little bits of the jigsaw that don't appear to be fitting in correctly. And look, they're still not a million miles off the pace at this moment. There's some very difficult games to still come in the next fortnight. And how they emerge from that, I think, is going to, especially the transfer window as well, is going to define what comes next. There's little positive bits and pieces that I'm going to try and sprinkle in at points during this video. But ultimately, it's a club that needs a proper, almost like an appraisal of itself. Everything, the practices, the things they've done. I feel that there's a lot of people within Tottenham Hotspur that don't really think they're doing anything wrong at various points, all the way up to the top. And I think that's the biggest problem, is the inability to appraise oneself, I guess. We've all got to do it. We've all got to know where we're going wrong. Make sure we don't repeat patterns of the past that have failed repeatedly. And push forward in the right way. So, we're going to have a little look at some of these. You can just hear it in my voice. It's like one of those when now I've kind of got the added thing of, back in the day when I was just a football fan going to matches, I could get myself all wound up about the result and whatever would happen. And I'd be properly annoyed for days after a particularly annoying result. Now because my working life is shaped around Tottenham Hotspur, which it has its good things, but there's also bad sides to it. So whereas I may not be as annoyed over a course of days as I was simply as a fan, now when those goals are going in and I know, I've got to write about this, I've got to then do a video about it as well. And I've got to, as I've said before, it is a bit cathartic, but it also is a part of me that's just like, I'd love to just kind of go away and hide in a dark cave and forget about it. I'm sure some people would love me to go and just hide in a dark cave, but yeah, it's not great. And it was such a strange atmosphere on yesterday at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, because, as I should say, those 3 things that I've just said, it's no different to what I've said before. It's all of the above. The reason is all 3 of those. It's Daniel Levy in the board, it's Antonio Conte, and it's the players. It's all 3. There's this kind of logic that persists for some reason, mostly on social media, I think perhaps, that you can only have one of those as your reason. But that's not how life or football works. Yes, certainly you can believe that one of those is more of an issue than the others. But there's almost this, a feeling that if you suggest that anything else is wrong, you're detracting from one of the other things. That's not true. It's not true. Everything has to be appraised. So let's say if you feel that Daniel Levy is the issue, if you feel that the board is the issue, you feel they're making mistakes aplenty, or they're not doing what you want them to do, then that's absolutely fine. But then you can't ignore things that Antonio Conte is doing that aren't quite right as well. And the same with the players. You know, you'll often find, anyone that's followed my stuff, it's always been a bugbear of mine that whenever a manager gets into problems and ends up maybe being sacked or leaving the club, it feels like the players get away with it every single time. They know that the manager's going to carry the can for it. So I'm always willing to throw them into the mix as well. But it's all of the above. It is like Brewster's Millions, but the opposite. Was it none of the above he wanted everyone to vote for? I'm saying all of the above to vote for. They've all done things that could have been done better, or they've made mistakes, or I think flexibility, certainly when it comes to Daniel Levy, the board, and also Antonio Conte, I think it's having a bit more flexibility and adaptability, that's the word I'm looking for, in changing out of old habits, making yourself less predictable in the way you work. So yeah, but yesterday was weird at the stadium because I did, and a few of us felt that there was going to be more frustration vented. You know, anyone that's been in that stadium this season, you know that the majority of games, or a fair old whack of them, have had booze at half-time. They have. I don't mean alcohol, I mean the booze. And we all expected it. You know, with Spurs 2-0 down, you kind of thought, okay, they're coming. But then we had this weird moment right at the end of the half when it was Højbjerg, wasn't it? Højbjerg had a shot. I think it was just after Højbjerg put in a really good cross that Kane headed and it was saved. Then from the resulting corner, literally almost on a stroke of half-time, Højbjerg had a shot in the box which I think went wide. But I can't remember, maybe Saliba. Saliba slipped and fell, and as he did, he lightly brushed Højbjerg's foot, and Højbjerg fell to the floor. And I think, certainly in the press box, we all thought the referee, was it Craig Pawson, pointed to the spot. And we're like, oh, this is a bit of a game changer. And I think a lot of people in the crowd thought that as well. And then suddenly he blew the half-time whistle and everyone walked off. And I think almost it prevented those boos that were maybe being prepared to come because nobody really knew what was happening. Everyone was just kind of confused. It was a very, very strange moment. So I think that was why perhaps we didn't get that at that point. They just all headed off to the concourses to drown their sorrows or the other kind of booze or get something to eat. And then at the end, when I thought maybe we'll get some kind of noise or something, Spurs did their trick that they've done a few times. I say trick, I do think it's something they've always done, but it does help them in this regard. They pump out music very loudly as soon as that final whistle goes. If they win, it's, you know, it's glory, glory, Tottenham Hotspur. If they lose, it's any old random bit of kind of music that seems to come out. Just to, you know, there was 61,870 supporters in the stadium yesterday, which was such a great turnout. They deserved far better than what they were served up in the end. But yeah, there wasn't even a chance for them to kind of have a moan at the end because you wouldn't have heard it. It was so loud, the music. I just think what's the saddest thing for me, and we were talking about this amongst ourselves as journalists, is that I was sat before the game, sat next to, among a few kind of Arsenal regular journalists. I know a few of them, used to work with a couple of them, and just know some of them, because sometimes in the Nationals, although you may cover one club, sometimes if there's a European match, you might get sent suddenly to cover a different game. It kind of works like that. So I know quite a few of them quite well. And they were all obviously saying, oh, you know which way it's going to go. Harry Kane's going to get a penalty, and the home team will win. This is where these North London derbies have gone for years now. And I don't know, I just had this feeling. That things aren't quite clicking properly at Spurs. And if there was a time when that pattern was going to be broken, it would have been yesterday. And unfortunately, of course, it was the way it was. There's just, this is what I was saying to them, there's just like a boring predictability about Tottenham right now. And the way they're going to play, the way the game is going to pan out. You know that they will start the game quite brightly, press high up the pitch, looking like they're going to do all the things you want them to do, but they won't score. They don't score in those moments most of the time. Then what happens is after 10-15 minutes, it's like someone just presses a switch and they all start to drift slowly back, deeper and deeper down the pitch. They sit there in this deeper role, inviting pressure on themselves. Then they'll concede maybe a goal, maybe two. And then the second half, they'll come out desperately looking to make amends. Sometimes, they've come back, but more recently, they haven't been able to. And it's, like I said, this boring predictability about it all. You know what you're going to get now when you watch a Tottenham match. And not in a good way. It's such a strange team. They've scored more goals than everyone but City and Arsenal. Yet, it feels like those goals have been kind of grouped against a certain amount of teams, maybe 5 or 6 teams where they've kind of whacked a few in against them. I think Southampton, Palace now, Leicester. There's a few that have kind of taken the brunt of those goals, and the rest have been spread out far more thinly. And yeah, it's just this pattern to each game. It's almost like I could write my match report before the game starts and just fill in the names. Yeah, and like I say, I'm very privileged that I don't have to pay for it. Fair play to everyone that pays to see the same thing week in, week out this season. I guess it's just with the hope that it's going to change. Because this is the weird thing, is that they're capable of doing it. Like, second half, yeah, well, even first half, Ramsdale had to save from Sonny. It was a big chance when Sessegnon played him through. And also, yeah, at the end, like I said, that Højbjerg chance for cross for Kane. So there was that. But then the second half, they had a fair few chances as well. And, Spurs had 17 shots on goal to Arsenal's 14. 7 efforts on target to Arsenal's 5. And, Ramsdale was named man of the match for his saves. And it's like, you would think, hearing that Spurs were the better team and didn't deserve to lose. But they still deserved to lose. They did. They didn't do enough. Which sounds mad when the keeper is making a string of saves. But there's also the aspect that I think of Arsenal probably taking their foot off the pedal a little bit in the second half. But just Spurs, they keep getting themselves in this situation like a blueprint that they follow. And the problem is maybe against teams in the lower half of the table, you can go behind and still have that quality to come back. If you're playing teams in the top 6, top 7, you can't do that and then expect to get back in the game. They're not going to let you. They're going to put the game out of sight, and that's what's happening now a little bit more regularly. And you look at Conte's record against the top 6, it is rubbish, quite frankly. It is, other than the City win, and Arsenal at home. I think that's it. Unless I'm missing someone, I think that's it. And, you can chuck Newcastle into that now this season as well. Newcastle obviously coming to Spurs and winning. It is poor. I don't think it's any coincidence. I think it's because of this blueprint that they're playing with at the moment. I will maintain that the Conte Spurs marriage is such a weird one. And I was thinking about this yesterday, actually, as I was on the way to the game, that you look across at Chelsea, and Chelsea are a win-now club with a project manager right now, and they're struggling. Spurs are a project club with a win-now manager. So they've just like a complete swap around from what Chelsea are doing. It's almost like you just think you should probably say, do you fancy a swap, lads? Just probably each would better fit the other team. Very, very weird situation. And it's left Spurs in kind of like this limbo at the moment with so many unanswered questions, and they need the answer to these questions really before they can move forward, because does Conte want to truly stay at Spurs? If not, do Spurs really then want to spend the money on someone that might not be there next season? And especially as Conte requires a certain kind of player. You can end up buying a player that might not fit other managers, and then you're left stuck with them. I mean, they're finding this without being disrespectful or trying to be. Emerson Royale is a good example of signing a player for one manager in Nuno and then him not really fitting Conte when he came in. And so I do wonder whether Spurs now in this January window in a bit of a kind of situation of you need to change things, you need to spend. But do you go for players that are very much Conte players for fear of being lumbered with them and the next manager not wanting them. It's a mess. It's a mess. And, you know, Spurs maybe will be looking at the fact of, say, hey, we did spend money. We did bring in players for you last summer. And has he done enough with those players that have brought in? And I think the most glaring example is going to be Bissouma. You know, Bissouma against Arsenal was a good example. Last season ran the show. He caused them so many problems. And this is a guy that has been one of the best Premier League midfielders in recent years. Comes to Tottenham, and honestly, it's like they've signed his brother, like Bees Yasuma or something. I don't know why that wouldn't be his brother's name anyway. That makes no sense. But you know what I mean. It's he's an incredibly talented player, one of the best around. Spurs have reduced him to a bit part player who has not impressed really, other than a couple of occasions. Was it against Liverpool? I think Liverpool was maybe his best performance in a Spurs shirt. Yeah. And it's... look, Conte always points to the injuries, and I think that's fair. I do think this season the injuries have played their part. Like I said earlier, Kulusevski and Richarlison missing chunks of the season. Bentancur now is a big miss as well. Lucas obviously would have been another option he would have turned to, although probably not on the same quality level as the others. But it's also difficult on the other hand, and I've kind of touched on this before, it's difficult to see what players have improved under him. And that's one of the biggest things for me, because he is one of the world's best coaches. And you speak to people and you talk about the way he coaches players. And last season was a brilliant example how, as a team, Spurs improved hugely under Conte. But if you're looking for individuals, you know, you can make arguments for certain players and why maybe they just look better, I guess, without his involvement, it may be unfair. I would say the ones that I can think of off the top of my head that improved, I'd say Bentancur has got better and better. I'd say Ben Davies has got better. I know some people maybe think, but he was doing that for Wales when he played in a similar role, but I wouldn't say it was a similar role. It's slightly more attacking at Spurs. Son obviously improved a lot last season, had the season of his life, but then this season kind of throws all of that out the window. And then after that, I'm struggling a bit. You could say Højbjerg has improved in his attacking sense. You know, even Romero, since he's come in, I don't think he's continually got better and better and better. You know, I don't think we've seen that yet. Of course, injuries have interrupted that. Kulusevski, it's a difficult one because Kulusevski kind of just came in and went bang and made an impact for me. Not for me, in my opinion. And that's where I'm struggling. Honestly, I'm really the bit is because I'm trying to think of players. I mean, Matt Doherty had a period where he was better, but obviously that hasn't been sustained. It's a difficult... I mean, honestly, in the comments, please, if you can tell me the players that have really improved under him. And hopefully, look, if he does stick around, then we will see more and more improvements. I guess he's been here at Spurs for, what are we up to now? November, so we're about 14 months now. So perhaps it's too early, but there's a part of me that feels that that's long enough to see genuine improvements in certain players. And like I say, just so weird because he does have such a brilliant kind of reputation as a coach as well. His post-match interviews with the media and the press conference were not great. They weren't. I don't think he struck the right tone. He'd spent most of them either saying how brilliant Arsenal were and how they're going to be real title contenders. He said at one point, it was to me, he responded to me and said that he started off by saying he wasn't disappointed with Spurs' performance, but then for some reason later on switched to saying he was slightly disappointed. It was a weird answer. And then he went off on a tangent, which he keeps doing at the moment, about young players that he's given game time in recent weeks. So we had this odd situation where they just lost a North London derby, and the press conference in the wake of that derby and the absolute aftermath of a North London derby defeat ended up with him talking about Japhet Tanganga. and it made no sense to me. It was in the answer to my question. And this is a guy that started one Premier League game this season. And he wasn't even in the squad yesterday. I have no idea how he managed to talk to Japhet Tanganga. Completely unclear to me. I don't understand it. He just has the impression, I use this analogy in my piece after the game, he has the air of a man who's dined at Michelin-star restaurants for most of his life, but now he's having to kind of slum it a little bit and eat regularly with his family in like a fast food chain. He's smiling, he's going through the motions, trying to make out that he's happy. But he's reminding them all constantly that, it's not what I'm used to. And, you should probably lower your expectations on what's about to be served up. And that's what it feels like. It doesn't... I don't know, just none of it is what Spurs fans want to hear. And I think if they were watching good football, even them falling short would be a bit more palatable. Keeping with the food metaphor there. And they know that, you've got 2 games against Man City coming up. Fulham away, which is a far tougher test than it probably ever has been in recent seasons, or seasons in the past when they're in the Premier League. And of course, you also got 2 weeks left of the transfer window. It's almost like this feels like a big distraction from the transfer window as well, which it really shouldn't be. And I do think Spurs' season will hinge on what Levy and Fabio Paratici decide or manage to agree on in these coming days with clubs, players, whatever. Because I do think the second half of the season should be different. It should be. You'd hope it will mirror what last season's did. If people steer clear of injuries, I mean, you even saw it yesterday, the players that didn't even make it onto the bench, like Tanganga, Spence as well. Obviously, Lucas wasn't on there because he's injured. But Bentancur wasn't on there either. But it was suddenly everything looked stronger. I know it didn't work out in the end, but you suddenly had a bench that had Richarlison to come on. Brian Hill, who's, Brian Hill's one that's improved. We could stick him in there. I guess improved in a Premier League style. But is that purely because he managed to finally get the chance because of injuries? Swings and roundabouts, I guess. But yeah, the squad looks so much stronger. But it's just about making it click, making it work. The quality for me is better than the performances. I feel like that team that even he had out yesterday should have given Arsenal a tougher test overall than they did. I'm not saying that there's options across. I do think they're still light in a few areas. Of course, the right wing back, if he's not going to trust Jed Spence, then yes, he needs another option there because obviously Emerson doesn't quite fit the bill and Matt Doherty had a quiet game yesterday. And then I do think you do need another attacking player to be able to be brought in as well. So I don't feel like he has, the exact squad to rely on. And of course, we can talk about the defence as much as we want and whether that needs changing. I was just thinking, Lucas Moura. We don't even know a return date for Lucas Moura right now. I think that's why you have to bring in another attacker because you have to have that another option because you get an injury to one of them and then suddenly the bench is very bare again. You just have the one potential player. And if you get 2, you have no attacking options on the bench again. Yeah. I think the problem as well that lies ahead for Daniel Levy is it's all very well that there's a growing frustration in Conte with some fans. However, if Conte fails, so did Levy. It's not one of those like, you're getting all the flack now. It's not that because it's your flack as well because you chose to appoint him and then didn't really create the environment in which, rightly or wrongly, he's flourished in the past. And, for all of the off-the-field progress, that incredible stadium, the training ground, all of that, on the pitch, there's no getting away from it. Levy and Enoch, of course, have been the constant, while the variable has been the 11 managers that haven't been able to win a trophy, and the one who did but failed in the Premier League, Juan de Ramos. Look, I'm not saying that they were all failures at all because they didn't win silverware, but there is a constant in the lack of trophies, and that is the people at the top. They just haven't pushed it on just to that next degree. You know, you've got one of the world's best stadiums, you've got one of the world's best training grounds, you've got one of the world's most successful managers right now in Conte. Right now, this club should be sitting right on the cusp of dining at that top table. Going back to the food analogy, they should be right there, just kind of, you know, waiting to sit at a table. Their buzzer has been called, they're coming up to the desk, but they just haven't built on it. They should have been building on the forward strides made during that Pochettino era, and also learn from the mistakes the club and the board made during it. Again, Pochettino was not blameless whatsoever. You know, he did things that weren't that didn't help himself, but ultimately that was a period that really should have been learnt from it, and it doesn't feel like it ever was. They're slipping backwards. They are. And I think what makes it even more galling, and I've said this in the past, Arsenal are striding past them. Like I say, 14 points ahead now, and they're doing it in a way that will feel eerily familiar. They're showing patience in a young project manager. It's paying dividends for them. The board at Arsenal have just spent the money at the right times. And they've now created this platform on which they play terrific football. They're exciting to watch. I know a few Arsenal fans, and they're all very much feel more connected to the club than they ever had, which is where I think Spurs so frustratingly were about 4 or 5 years ago. And now I feel like the Spurs fans are probably more disconnected than they have been in a long time with the club. It's so, I guess, simple yet difficult. It's so obvious to see, but seemingly so difficult to put into practice. And the problem is they can't afford to stagnate or slip backwards. And the thing that I guess, you know, the owners would say is that Spurs actually spent more than Arsenal this season. Yet Arsenal, in the same amount of time, have managed to leapfrog Spurs and fly past them. So you could say that, but then you could also suggest that were they the right signings at the right time? Had Arsenal spent more in the previous windows to put themselves in a better foundation to then just build on with little incremental increases, if that's the right expression, this summer? Because, yeah, you look around you, you look at Newcastle. Newcastle even started to tap into that wealth yet. You know, they've made a few purchases, but the power that they will have, yet they still sit above Tottenham. United stood behind Eric Ten Hag in the power battles that were going on there early in his reign, and now they're paying the dividends as well. You know, they're moving in the right direction. Even Chelsea, who feels like they're a complete chaotic mess right now, they've got the money to get themselves out of those issues. You know, whether it ends up with being with Graham Potter in the long term or not, but you know, they've got and so United also have the money to be able to throw at stuff as well because of the huge revenue that club generates across the world. Chelsea are building the biggest squad I think I've ever seen in world football. I know they've got some injury problems, but you know, they're in danger of heading towards 40 very good first team squad players, not even like young players in there as well. I do wonder whether we'll get to the end of the window and there's going to have to be a mass clear out, and whether we, you know, maybe that could be an opportunity with Spurs with different owners. Perhaps there's an opportunity for them to get some players on the kind of the cast-offs that actually may be very good players for Spurs. I don't know. But they're going to have to get players out that door. And obviously you've got Man City who can... They don't look quite right at the moment, but we know the quality they've got, you know, the coach that they've got and the ability to change things if they need to with a bit of spending. Or a lot of spending. Whereas Spurs, they just feel like they're in transition again. I mean, how often do we feel like Spurs are in transition? And that's what comes of disjointed managerial appointments, constantly changing up what those managers need because they're so different from the last, having no clear pathway or pattern or plan of who you're appointing. There's not a P, isn't it? Yeah. It's... they are. They've got players that are going to need replacing as well, as in they really like key players that are going to need replacing as well. Obviously, Hugo Lloris, 36 now. Even Sonny, he's 30. Harry Kane, 18 months left on his contract. I'm not saying Sonny should be booted out, by the way. Sometimes people take those and get very overexcited. I'm just saying he's 30, so long term, of course, he's going to have to be replaced in the long term, in a way. Depends kind of how he is as an older player. Be interesting to see what Sonny's like as he gets. Obviously, at the moment, he just needs to kind of get himself back on track. But yeah, Harry Kane as well, and there's players in that defence that have been key players that you do wonder whether they will continue to. Will Eric Dyer become a key player for the next manager? Or a lot of managers have turned to Eric Dyer, and I don't know if any of them have turned him into the defender that they think he can be. He's had some good runs of games, and I felt last season was his most consistent yet. But has he ever become that? Conte said he could be one of the world's best defenders. So did Mourinho, I think, as well. Would we say he's one of the world's best defenders? I don't think you can. So is he a player that ends up having to be upgraded if he cannot reach that level? Yeah, I mean, if I'm Harry Kane, I've got 18 months left. I just don't feel that you can really anymore. I think he could be forgiven for wondering why would he want to stay at the end of that 18 months if that's where he gets to. And that's really sad, because Harry Kane should be finishing his career at Spurs, and he should be finishing his career with silverware. But he needs to be convinced of what the future holds for Tottenham. And the way it looks, the way it kind of lurches from one to the next, and one direction, one plan, with no real DNA, as they like to call it. Yeah, if I'm Harry Kane, I'd find it difficult to stick around. I would, especially because, especially when he, as a free player, a free transfer in 18 months, he could pick his sides, really, a lot of them, around the world. And I even think next summer, if he doesn't sign a new deal, I think it's going to be very difficult for Tottenham to keep him again. God, it's depressing, isn't it? I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. It really is. It's all about commitment. It is when it comes to Tottenham right now. It's going to be the key word. Whether Tottenham and Levy are committed to making the Conte appointment work after they appointed him. They've got to make their decision. They've got to try and prove it right to everyone. And the next fortnight will show that. But then on the flip side, if they believe that Conte isn't going to show commitment to them, whatever they do, then their response in the market is going to make that very clear very quickly. And I think that's going to be one of those scenarios where, if that's the case, I don't think it should really continue, because it's going to be such a toxic mess of a club. I think everyone just needs to sit down and know exactly what's happening. I mean, these are all the meetings that would have taken place when I came back from the World Cup. So I have no idea how we're in this situation. There still seems to be doubts over what comes next and where things are going. I take you back to those statements from Daniel Levy, the chairman's messages in the last 2 years. 2021, he spoke about a return to playing football with the style for which we are known, free-flowing, attacking and entertaining. Then last year, he wrote, "We shall continue to work with energy and vigour to make all of our fans around the world proud to support Tottenham Hotspur." I think right now, it's very difficult to say that either of those statements ring true for Spurs fans, and that's what's got to change. I do feel sorry for them, honestly. I really, really do. Like I've said, I grew up a Spurs fan, but I've been able to remove a fair old whack of the emotional attachment, especially in defeats. I feel that, like I say, defeats, it's more of my work brain kicks in. I probably feel like more of a fan maybe in the good times, in the bits where I can enjoy, and I kind of, I guess you do feel a bit proud of where the team's going. But certainly in the tougher moments, I do feel sorry for the fans that don't have the outlet that I do of being able to just write about it and kind of getting that side of it, because, it's very frustrating. It is. It just feels like deja vu around the club. A lot of decisions that are made at the top, a lot of decisions that are being made in matches right now. And, and fans are starting to call it. Like, a good example yesterday was Richarlison came out to warm up right at the end of half-time. It was a really vigorous warm-up. And I'll be honest, I don't really look at social media too much during a match or in the immediate aftermath of it because it's just chaotic mess. But I did notice one comment came up, and it was someone said, what's the point? He's not going to, Richarlison, this is, he's going to be warming up for a long time because he's not going to come on until about the 70th, 75th minute. They were spot on. Richarlison pretty much warmed up for the entirety of the second half until that point he came on, about 70 minutes. And that's what I mean. Everything's becoming very, very predictable. We know how games are going to play out. And the worst thing I think as well is that some of the worst performances have been at home. 4 out of the last 5 home matches have been defeats in the Premier League. And the bulk of your fans, your match-going fans as a club, they're watching those games. They're there, like I said, almost 62,000 there yesterday, fans. It looked like the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium was going to become a fortress. And right now, they look almost more vulnerable there than they do when they head off on the road. They look like visitors in their own home, really. The formation, the way they... I don't know whether it's the way they set up or the way they naturally, with a lack of confidence, fall into. But, there were periods after that first 10 minutes when Arsenal were just playing it around as if they were at the Emirates. And it's embarrassing. It's not what the fans are paying their money to see. And the interesting thing for me as well is that all that eye-catching fitness work, I was out in South Korea, I was able to tell you and report on like the fitness sessions out there were ridiculous. Players being like Harry Kane being sick by the side of the pitch, Sonny Kane collapsing and everything by the side of the pitch because they were being worked so hard. You would think that with that level of fitness, which continued during the season and it continued in January as well, December in the World Cup break with those who were at the World Cup, you would think that team would be so fit, they would be able to pretty much run, press and harass teams for 90 minutes. But they don't. They don't. Some people might suggest, are they overworked? But then also, this burst of energy in the second half when other teams are flagging, it's clearly there. Is there not a way you can balance it out a bit more? Could you not just press across, 75 of the minutes rather than concentrating everything into the first 10 minutes and the second half? I don't understand it, because for me, I've said it before, but the best version of Spurs is the snarling, harassing, pressing, aggressive Tottenham that they were certainly for a couple of years in the middle under Poch. They were really went at teams and teams didn't know how to handle them. That's the best one for me. And like I say, whether it's a fitness thing, whether it's a confidence thing, Conte just hasn't been able to fix it. The amount of times I've asked him about the difference in first halves and second halves and maintaining any kind of consistent pressing, he hasn't had an answer. He says himself he doesn't know. But even I'd say, there's a difference in him on the touchline in terms of, in the first half, I always think he looks quite, at the moment, like sedate and emotionless, and he's just watching everything with like a certain pensive nature. It almost mirrors the team. And in the second half, he's like a madman again. Like I was watching him yesterday, and there was one moment where it looked like he was about to grab Matt Doherty to tell him to get up the pitch and press someone that he wanted him to. And I just wonder whether, do the players feed off of that? I don't know. I don't know. If I had an answer, I would be emailing, whatever Antonio Conte's email address is and saying, aha, I've got it. Or eureka was the word. Aha, it sounds more like Alan Partridge. Not what I meant to say. But this is the thing. It's those home fans as well. This is their only exposure to the games in the flesh. So all you're doing is you're sending 60,000+ people away every week, disgruntled and disappointed. And they're the ones that will cause the any frustration to grow. Yeah, you can kind of get away, I guess, with away performances being slightly less impressive, because obviously there's the admittedly brilliant travelling fans of Spurs that go there, but there's less of them to kind of get wound up. I guess if you're constantly going every week or every other week at home and you're seeing good performances, maybe you're a little bit more satisfied. But yeah, it's a strange situation. The emotions are starting to be stirred up in the fans. You can see that. I should stress there is no emotion that warrants what happened at the end of the game. That one supporter, we can kind of see it. At first I couldn't see whether he connected or not, but we could see it was about to happen. He ran down the south stand, stood onto the advertising hoarding at the bottom and lashed out with his foot towards Ramsdale, and then sprinted back up there to try and get away from it all. No excuse whatsoever, absolutely no excuse. To provide set the scene, I guess is the best way to say it. So Ramsdale, he'd been having a back and forth all through the match with the fans, and at the end, at the final whistle, he his reaction was he punched the air towards the stand, kind of put his tongue out, and it wasn't like a sticking his tongue out way. It was one of those where they just hang their tongue out of their mouth, and then he kissed the Arsenal badge in front of them. Like I say, it was kind of like the punchline at the end of a back and forth with the fans. What I should stress, I've covered football at every pretty much level you can cover football at, and there's one thing you see at every football ground, whatever the level, whatever there's talent, whatever the part of the country, every single match day, is that the visiting goalkeeper will have some form of back and forth banter, if you want to call it, with the fans behind the goal. It's just what they do. On the whole, there's pretty much, it's good-natured. The goalkeeper knows they're going to take a lot of flack. They're going to be under pressure. They're going to have people kind of trying to put them off and everything. But then some of them that are a bit more of a character, they do give it back. It happens everywhere. At no way should it ever result in the goalkeeper being, I guess it's assaulted is the word, punched, kicked, whatever it is. Yeah. You end up with a lifetime ban from the stadium. Yes, I know people are joking at the moment, that's not a bad thing, but it would be. Of course it would be. Football is cyclical. It goes round in a cycle. So yes, Spurs are rubbish right now, but they will be good again. And you will miss it because you're not allowed in the stadium. Potentially even worse, might end up with a criminal record. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But obviously you're doing it in a stadium, state-of-the-art stadium with a camera on every seat. It's the easiest possible stadium to be able to identify anyone doing something like that. Look, Richarlison kind of went over and had his say. He was wagging his finger a lot at Ramsdale, who was not happy with him. He did kind of poke his finger in Ramsdale's face as well towards the end. He's such a wind-up merchant, Richarlison is. I mean, yes, of course, Ramsdale is. That's part of it. That's part of the kind of the game as well. And you could see him afterwards. He went over to the reason he went over to stand was because his water bottle was there. But yeah, Richarlison had been a proper wind-up merchant. When I say about that period where he was warming up, he was causing a nuisance to Arsenal every time. When they tried to take a throw, he'd stand in the way. They tried to take corners, he would stand right next to the corner flag for no apparent reason. There was one point where Martinelli put out his hand to him and he offered to shake his hand because he played for Brazil together. And Richarlison refused. I think he said, I saw some quotes afterwards that apparently he said he was felt like Martinelli had been diving and he didn't want to shake his hand or something. But yeah, I mean, it's all just a sideshow. It was, because all that mattered really at the end of the day was the performance on the pitch and the simple fact that, Spurs now find themselves 14 points behind Arsenal. They need to find a way forward. They do. It's Hugo. I need to speak about Hugo. Hugo Lloris. Look, Hugo Lloris has been an incredible servant to Tottenham Hotspur. He has. World Cup winner, has been at Spurs now for more than a decade, 10.5 years. He's saved them on countless occasions with massive saves in big games and little games. He's saved the club millions over that decade because they haven't had to splash out money on buying a new number one, because he's been there. He's had the odd moments where he's maybe been a bit shaky, but on the whole, I do think he's been quite a consistent keeper. You just probably remember the mistakes, but you maybe don't remember how kind of few there were. Unfortunately, they are starting to get more regular. He's played 440 times for Tottenham now. Kept a clean sheet on 149 of those occasions. It's just become part of the fabric at Spurs. Pochettino used to refer to him as part of his coaching staff. He kind of felt he was that important off the pitch as well. He's a very level-headed captain, very much a thinker. Yeah, I would say he's probably louder and more vocal behind the scenes than you'd think he is. And on the pitch, I've said this before, when there were no fans, we could really hear him and how loud he actually is out there. But when you're in the stadium, you probably don't hear that quite as much. It got through periods where people wanted to replace him. Nuno, from what I understand, wanted to bring in a successor to him, and perhaps she thought that Galini was the one. Narrator's voice, he was not. He got through that, and I'd say that was probably one of his most consistent seasons last season. I thought he had a really good overall season. He earned himself a new deal, didn't he, as well? Bearing in mind that all the loyalty he showed to the club, didn't really show much interest in improving his deal that he signed way back in 2016 until pretty much they realised, pants, we're really going to have to give him a new deal because it's cheaper than buying a new goalkeeper, and he's playing quite well. But the problem is, and this is the sad part of it all, because he has been an incredible player for Spurs, I do believe that he's now 36, and whereas a lot of the mistakes in the past, I'd say, were mostly confined to his feet. He's just not, a goalkeeper that is that comfortable with his feet. Now I think they're starting to spread to his hands at the moment. I was looking at the Premier League stats. You only have to go on the Premier League's website to see this. It's not even one I had to deep dive into. He's on the top of an unwanted table. He has made 3 direct errors leading to goals this season. No other goalkeeper in the Premier League this season has made more than 1. And no outfield player has made as many as 3. There's only a couple. There's about 4 players that have made 2 direct errors leading to goals. And Lloris is on 3. I said earlier this month, Spurs' plan in the summer is to bring in a long-term successor for Hugo Lloris. I just worry that I don't think he's done anything thus far in 2023 to prove that that's something that's not needed. And that's the saddest thing. He retired from international football, didn't he? Was it last week? 145 caps for France, record total. He's done it all with France. He's won the World Cup, been to the World Cup final again last month. But I just feel like maybe we're heading towards the end of his conclusion with Spurs as well as France, which is so sad to see. He does remain a wonderful shot stopper. He made a fair few good saves against Arsenal as well, but everyone remembers him shoveling the ball into his own net from Saka's low cross. And even before that was an iffy moment with his feet that led to Longley then hitting a deflected clearance that went across the penalty box. It was all a complete mess, really. Because obviously when you take that Saka cross and put it in the net, and then you look at Douglas Luiz's shot that under no real pressure he spilled, and obviously Villa scored from as well. The problem is there's just this air of worry now that creeps in, I guess, again across not only the fans, but I think it's some of his teammates. So when ball's played back to him, you can hear the crowd like, ooh, kind of thing. There's a real anxiety among the crowd. And I think it must influence whether the players play it back sometimes as well. There must be a fear of that. And then the moment he makes a mistake, you can just see the confidence drain out of the team. And look, I do think there were other issues as well with yesterday's performance. But of course, if like against Villa, you're going to essentially, he did chuck the ball in his own net, suddenly the whole game can turn. And it becomes so much more difficult. And yeah, it's really sad. It is, because he's been one of those constants. And I would say a good constant over the years for Spurs, but I just feel like maybe we're heading towards the end game for Hugo Lloris. Unless, there could well be an Indian summer for him. He could suddenly find a resurgence. There certainly are goalkeepers in their late 30s that have really found, some of them, new levels. But I don't know. I just hope we're not saying au revoir a little bit sooner than anyone really wants to. I mean, Conte was asked about him afterwards. And of course, he stuck by his man, as any manager would. He said, in this situation, it's always difficult. I think it's not positive to be focused on only one situation or two situations. Football, I know, is this, and sometimes you can do positive things and save many situations. But honestly, I consider Hugo one of the best keepers in the world, and it can happen. It can happen that sometimes you can make a mistake. For sure, when there is the mistake of the keeper, it is more visible. Hugo, for us, is one of the players who's really important for the dressing room, for his personality, because we're talking about a player who's one of the best keepers in the world. So, yeah, hopefully he responds. Hopefully he responds positively. Because right now, yeah, I'm hoping it's just a bit of a funk he's in. Because if not, yeah, I think unfortunately we're heading towards that end game. Positives. I did say I was going to put some positives in. I haven't really done that, and we're almost an hour in. Pape Matar Sarr. He was assumed as ankle injury was still causing him problems in the week, so Sarr got the nod. Hell of a full Premier League debut to make. 20-year-old thrust into a North London derby. I think Ryan Mason had the same. I feel like it did. Maybe even Tom Carroll. Some might, be concerned about the luster of the companies he's in if we're going back to Tom Carroll. But, look, I thought he did well. I did. I thought he showed a lot of composure and maturity beyond his years, especially in a midfield 2 against Arsenal 3, which was another issue I felt with yesterday. It's one of those where you do... It's all well and good having an extra man elsewhere. But if you're going to sacrifice that man to have an extra man elsewhere, you've got to take advantage of it. And obviously Spurs didn't. It was quite interesting. In the tunnel before the game, Conte gave Sarr like a kiss on the head. It was quite a tender moment. I did say he's got a big affection for him. I didn't realise it was going to result in a kiss, but there you go. Here's some of his stats I looked into. He made 3 tackles, 3 interceptions, as well as 1 clearance. And those are better defensive numbers than anyone else on the pitch. He had a higher pass success rate than any other starting Spurs player apart from Clement Longley. Sarr's was 89.1%, Clement Longley's was 90.8%. Conte said after the game, he did his club interview, he said, absolutely, I was pleased with him. He showed a great personality. He showed a great personality and played a good game. In my opinion, he showed to be an older player. This is very important because we're talking about a player that is only 20 years old, but he deserved to have this chance. Basuma in the last game in the FA Cup stopped himself with a problem in his ankle, and this week he struggled with this ankle. Today the choice was between Pape Sarr and Skippy. Against Crystal Palace I decided to have Skippy, and today Pape Sarr, but both players, Skippy and Pape Sarr, we can count on them. Then we're talking about young players, we have to work to develop, and then they will be ready. Spurs keep having a bit of a mare about the matter. Like I said, it's an important matter. Apparently it is his first name. He is Pape Matar, and his surname's Sarr. So yeah, it is the continuation of his first name. So it should always be in there, but Spurs team sheet didn't have it in, and then the announcer didn't put in the matter. So yes, lost sight of the matter. But yeah, no, I thought he was a positive. I did think he was, and I do think he'll get better and better, which is quite exciting. He seems to be kind of the main young player that Conte genuinely seems to be quite excited about, which is a good thing. There was Ryan Sessegnon. Ryan Sessegnon had a mixed performance. I felt he got a lot of flack, and I understood it in terms of people wanting to see even Perisic. But to be fair, Conte has pretty much always used Sessegnon in the big games, and he has come up trumps with it for him. He's had some really good performances against the likes of City, Liverpool. I remember him playing well against. I think he played well against Arsenal last year as well in the 3-0. So I understood it. I understood it as a tactic to have a little bit more pace to deal with Saka. Just unfortunately, his most difficult moments were pretty much dealing with Saka. You could argue whether the cross that Lloris knocks into his own net, maybe he should have done better really setting on and trying to cut that out in the first place. But he did have some good points in the performance. This is what I find frustrating, is that, like I say, that big Son chance in the first half, that all came from a terrific run by Sessegnon, got the ball and then played a really clever reverse ball that if it had been, let's say, Kane, would have all been raving about it. It was a clever ball. Son runs in, but unfortunately he's denied by Ramsdale. And then he played a terrific 1-2 with Kane as well. And he hit a decent shot. It was a terrific save for me from Ramsdale. Just a reaction, almost like got his toe on it at the last second. So he did that well. There were a few breaks. Having criticised him last week for not really pressing enough for me, as in pushing his body and running, I actually felt he did a fair bit of that. The problem for me was that on the whole when he did it, apart from those 2 moments, he just messed up the cross. There were a few occasions when he got clear down the left and all he had to do... all he had to do really was get that ball across to one of the Spurs players in a white shirt, and he didn't do it. And I think that was where the frustration grew. I should stress that he's 22 years old. He is still a young player that has got a hell of a lot of developing to do, and I do think Conte likes him, but I guess he's just got to find more consistency to his performances, and he does trust him as well. But I can see he's getting a lot of it. He's getting a lot of the what do you call it? He's getting a lot of flack from the fans on social media, of course. But yeah, it's a strange one. It is a strange one. Positives. Kulusevski came back. It was good to see him back, and I did feel that he got better and better as the game wore on. Some really nice turns, and he was probably Spurs' main threat in the second half. And fair play to him. He lasted 85, 86, 87 minutes, something like that. Bearing in mind, obviously, he hasn't played for a couple of weeks. I thought he played. Conte said about him, "We have to continue to work and recover players." This was in his answer to me. Today was good to see again Kulusevski. I was taking a bit of a risk to put him in the starting 11 as he'd only had 3 days in training sessions with us. It was good to see Richarlison back in the last 20 minutes. It was good to see that Bentancur is very close to coming back to the team. About Lucas Moura, this is the only critical situation because it's very difficult to understand if he is going to come quickly or we have to wait a long time. On this side, in this situation, we have these type of injuries. I think we discovered and exploited the situation to give a chance to young players like Pape Sarr, Brian Hill, Oliver Skipp, and again, after a really bad injury. Also for Tanganga, it was important to play. That was a weird bit where you start to mention Tanganga. Now we know that in the squad you can count also on these young players. You know these young players need to develop and work, but at the same time they're improving and they deserve to have minutes. It was a weird press conference because I had to, my views on this. I had to ask the first question because no one else was offering it up, and you have to do the bog standard, what do you think of the match? But then I could see there were so many people that looked like they were going to ask questions that I didn't follow it up. I thought, okay, well, I'll leave it because we'll get a nice range of questions from the others. And what happened was someone asked him about Lloris, I think it was Tom from The Sun, and John Cross from The Mirror asked him about the fan kicking Ramsdale. And I'm looking around thinking, okay, we're going to get some more. And nobody asked anything, and suddenly it was done. And honestly, it was so frustrating because I had various follow-up questions that I would have preferred to have shoved in on the end of mine if I knew that only 2 other people were going to ask questions. I would have thought after a North London derby defeat, there'd be a load of questions. But, didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But there you go. So those are the positives. Sarr and Kulusevski's return and having Richarlison back, I guess, is another one as he gets better and better. If we can get the Richarlison from the World Cup, Spurs are going to get a very good player. He needs to start making more of an impact for Spurs. Of course he does. Has he even got a Premier League goal? I don't think he's got a Premier League goal, has he? So what comes next? The only kind of thing I think we can all cling to is that second half of last season. I think Spurs will improve, especially you get Bentancur back in the side, you get Kulusevski in a run of games, you get Richarlison kind of providing better competition for Son and Kulusevski himself as well, and Brian Hill hopefully continuing to develop, and also additions in the transfer market as well. You would hope that that's something they can repeat this season, that they can do that again as they did in the second half of last season as well. Because, you know, just on their own, Kulusevski and Bentancur transformed Spurs. They did last from February onwards last season. So there's no reason that they can't do the same again this season. Yeah. I mean, I've got various small quotes. What did I say? Conte said, "We're waiting on Rodrigo because he's another important player. You know that for us it's important to have all these players available because the squad is not so deep. But at the same time, to discover these young players makes me happy." He's really down a young player vein at the moment. Probably since we all started to kind of moan that he doesn't really use many of them. Honestly, keeping the players fit that he has now, having a good fortnight at the end of the January transfer and just making a couple of pivotal signings just makes the world of difference. But he does need to improve himself. He does. He needs to keep. He needs to show that the players are improving under him as well. I do think that's a key thing. Football needs to be better. It does. We need to see much better games. Fans need to enjoy going to matches again. That has to be a real thing. Press conferences need to be a bit better for me as well. Needs to be clarity over his future, I'd say, a bit more as well. This wishy-washy nature of one moment he's talking about the long-term future and then the next moment he's talking about we'll all find the best solution. You know, it just makes the whole... If the future's uncertain, I guess, how does that affect the team going forward? How do you have any kind of structure or path forward if the players think that potentially the manager's going next season or in the summer? Like I say, it dictates the club's transfer policy. Do they sign players for a manager that they don't know whether he's going to be there next season or not? You've got to be all going in the same direction, otherwise what's the point? And whether that's the fault of Daniel Levy and the board, or whether that's the fault of Antonio Conte, or all of the above, it's a problem that's just almost going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it, really? Because this is something that we all presumed would happen in the end. You know, that Conte and Spurs would end up being so different that the marriage would just not work in the end if they didn't conform to one another's needs, I guess. And I think Conte did that last season with Spurs, but then Spurs were always going to have to bend towards what he wanted in the first full season, I felt, under his reign. And we can all argue about the degrees as to whether they have done that or not. Yeah. I mean, I was going to read out. There's loads more quotes and stuff he said, but I'm not going to read them out because pretty much it's just him praising Arsenal and Man City, and also Spurs' performance in the second half, because a bad result could have killed everyone after they went 2-0 down. I think it still was a bad result. It really was. Yeah. And I just think, last thing Spurs fans want to hear is more praise of Arsenal right now. Or not being disappointed with a 2-0 defeat at home to your local rivals. It's all so mid-table, the way he speaks. It's almost like, I don't know, kind of feels like he wants to reset everyone's expectations, but should their expectations be that low? Honestly. It's, Yeah, it's a strange one. Because, I'm sure Spurs would want him to sign a new contract, but then on the flip side, what's the point if he's not going to be happy and it's not going to work? You're essentially locking yourself into a very expensive manager. And the flip side is also, if Conte, what's the point in him signing a new contract if he doesn't believe he's going to win the trophies that he demands for his CV? Oh, what a situation. What a situation. I think we'll know a hell of a lot more in this last 2 weeks of the window. I think we'll see where Spurs' intentions are at and what they feel that they're willing to do for Conte. Again, I think they have to back him. I don't really see any alternative, because then you are admitting that you made a massive bodge up. This is a club that very, very rarely admit to their mistakes. I mean, let's say Conte went and even Pochettino were to come back, or Thomas Tuchel. I think bringing Pochettino back in would be admitting a huge mistake. And I know that there's mixed views within that club about certain people that would like Poch back, and there's certain people that really wouldn't like him back. Maybe because it kind of shines a light on that decision and how Spurs haven't really pushed on since then. I should say, to be fair to Conte, I did take down a quote. He did actually offer an apology in his club interview. He said, for sure, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed and sorry for our fans, because I know the importance of this game, but I think we're trying to overcome a difficult period with injuries he's talking about. So I should put that in there for fair, to be fair. But yeah, this is such a big time ahead for Spurs. Levy and Paratici need to show that there is some kind of plan, and they're not just kind of winging it and hoping that they can kind of create this cheap version of Chelsea for Conte, and that the decision to appoint him was properly researched and thought through. I think you do. I think regardless of any fears over what happens with the next, I think you have to back him in the remainder of this window. I think it only needs to be one or two, preferably two players that, create a difference for Spurs in the coming months. Because, like I say, it all becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everything we said, and a lot of the media said about how it will all end for Conte and Spurs, becomes true. It's not fair on the fans. The fans packed out that stadium again, and they'll pack out the next one, because I think they're sold out for the first 5 games of 2023 at least. They don't deserve what's being served up to them at the moment, and it's not too late to change it. This is the thing. Yes, I know if they kind of can't get points from the City games, it all becomes very, very difficult, and the gap is a lot bigger. But it's not too late to change things. They did it last season. They marched back, and they can do it again. But honestly, it's going to be one of these next fortnight or so where there's going to be pressure from all sides. There's going to be mind games played. There's going to be stories that come out from both camps, kind of thing. All of us journalists are going to have to be very, very kind of wary of the motives for things coming out and why they're coming out. And on top of that, we've got a transfer window and speaking to everyone involved in that as well. So I'm going to be busy. Going to be knackered, which I am today. Late night writing about the match last night. Or early morning. So yeah, let's see what happens. Let's see what comes next. And yeah, what the uncertainty around it all leads to. It's the worst possible time for the uncertainty about everyone going forward, coming in a transfer window. It really, really is. Because like I say, it can kind of have an impact on the rest of the season. So yeah, let's see what happens next with Tottenham Hotspur, because I don't want to be having to talk about mid-season changes. That would be even more chaotic than what happened at the end of the Mourinho era, I think. I don't even want to envisage that, so I'm not going there. Not yet. Hopefully. That'll be one for another video. Hopefully not. But, yeah, we'll go there. You can see my brain's scrambling, trying to think of all the eventualities and things that might happen and might not. We'll learn a lot about Conte, Tottenham, and what's coming next in this next fortnight. It is I feel like there's been a lot of pivotal moments under Conte and in Tottenham's recent years. And this is another 14 days or so that fits firmly into that category. So, right, we're going to head off now. Sorry it was one of those videos. I could have gone on for a long time ranting, but I'm not going to, because I was very wary of not making it the hour and a half one I did last time. So I'm going to head off now. Hopefully you can enjoy your evening after that. And as always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Goodbye.